Hi, it's Kai. Number 10, the first animal in space. Let's start at the beginning and end at the end. Name that movie. Okay, for real. There have actually been a lot of animals sent into space, but the question is, what was the very first? It wasn't humans, obviously, nor was it monkeys or dogs, cats, or anything you are likely predicting. Drumroll, please. The first animal to go into space was fruit flies. American space scientists wanted to discover the effects of cosmic radiation on living creatures before risking the lives of human astronauts. Fruit flies were chosen as they share a lot of the same DNA as human beings. This may sound odd at first, but you'd be surprised just how similar we are. A V-2 ballistic missile recovered from the Nazis at the end of World War II was loaded with the fruit flies and traveled 67.7 miles into the air, the distance at which space officially begins. On its descent back to Earth, a capsule containing the flies was parachuted down into New Mexico. The test was a success, and the fruit flies came down to Earth in one piece, without any serious issues from the radiation. As such, humanity then decided to go a bit bigger with its animal test subjects. Number 9, space monkey. There's actually been a lot of monkeys sent into space, but Miss Baker was the original space monkey. OG space monkey. Miss Baker was a Peruvian squirrel monkey. She was selected from a group of 25 who had all been trained at the Naval School of Aviation Medicine. Yes, there was a literal training program in the 50s to teach monkeys how to go up in space. In May of 1959, Miss Baker and Miss Abel became the first United States animals to complete a flight beyond our atmosphere into the great and vast unknown. While Miss Baker is without doubt the most famous, she had another monkey friend with her too, Miss Abel, who was also placed into a flight capsule, dressed in a specially designed spacesuit, wired up with electrodes, and then flung hurling into space. The suborbital flight only lasted 15 minutes. The monkeys traveled 300 miles above the surface and then came back down to Earth. Amazingly, they actually survived this. They were flown to Washington for a press conference and treated like Hollywood celebrities. Miss Baker was then transferred to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in 1971, where she went on public display until she died of natural causes in 1984. Another famous monkey sent into space was a rhesus macaque named Albert II. He wasn't as lucky as Miss Abel and Miss Baker, though. Albert died on his way down. The parachute for the vessel itself failed, and thus the capsule containing the monkey crashed with the monkey inside. Sadly, other monkeys were also lost in various tests of the projects due to mechanical failures and other issues. As cruel as it sounds, scientists believe that these tests were vital for the eventual tests with humans, because if these monkeys couldn't survive, and monkeys are said to be our closest relatives amongst animals, then what hope did humans have? Number 8, mice. You might think that mice wouldn't be the best animal to send up to space. After all, they're small, very skittish, and they tend to be better, test subjects for more groundwork. But there have actually been quite a few tests conducted on mice in order to see the various effects of space. In fact, NASA has recently published a detailed study of mice housed at the International Space Station. Genetically modified mice were sent to the International Space Station. Genetically modified as in real super mice modified by science to be super strong. 40 female mice from a laboratory in Maine were manipulated using genetics to have their muscles grow way larger than ordinary mice, about twice as much. The experiment is known as Rodent Research 19, and it was designed to study how bone density and skeletal muscle mass can be less damaged by prolonged time spent in space. Scientists were interested in using a special treatment to block molecular signaling pathways to prevent muscle and bone density from being lost without gravity. Scientists used a special agent to block the pathways of the genetically modified mice. There was also a control of mice that did not receive the agent. The mice that received it maintained, and in some cases increased muscle mass even without gravity. They also recovered a lot quicker once returned to Earth. scientists discovered that by blocking certain hormones in the brain, they can prevent muscle loss in animals when stuck in space with no gravity. Sadly, a lot of the mice in these tests were lost, including yet another parachute failure. Thankfully, humanity worked out that glitch in the system. Remember, part of the test was to get these animals back alive. Having them die upon return kind of defeats the purpose. Number 7. Space Dog. The space race was one of the most important events in human history. Not only did it help get man into space and to the moon, but it was a political event that was meant to show whether the United States or the USSR was better equipped to progress the future of humanity. Sputnik 1 was the first artificial Earth satellite to be launched into space, but its brother, Sputnik 2, was the first craft to ever put an animal into space, or in this case, orbit. Laika was a Soviet space dog who became one of the first animals to enter space. She was the first animal that ever orbited around our planet, which was a pretty big accomplishment for a stray dog from the streets of Moscow. She went up on the spacecraft Sputnik 2, which was launched into low orbit in November of 1957. But Laika doesn't get a happy ending. Laika died mere hours after launch because the craft wasn't fully prepared for the launch into space, and both her remains and the craft burned up upon re-entry. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, there was never really a plan for her recovery or her survival. The Russians sent her into space with no intention of bringing her back to the surface alive. Because of this, she died, either from overheating or because of asphyxiation shortly after entering outer space. This may seem cruel, and it definitely is, but at the same time, there wasn't actually the technology yet to bring the animal back. Scientists also believed that humans would never be able to survive being launched off the world. The only way to test it, the Soviets thought, was to let a dog try. The experiment proved that a human would be able to survive the micro-G environment, and Laika helped pave the way for the first humans to be launched into space. Have you ever heard of Laika's story before? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Space geckos. As part of some weird sex experiment, the Russians recently sent 5 geckos into space, and they all died. According to BBC, the geckos most likely froze to death after the heating system malfunctioned. But just what exactly was this experiment all about? Well, scientists wanted to study the effects of weightlessness on the sex lives of geckos. Okay. Unfortunately, they didn't get any results because all the geckos froze to death. However, the fruit flies that were sent into space with the geckos as food survived and reproduced. Nobody really planned for that to happen, but it was proven that flies, the most annoying thing in the world, can still annoy future space people. Number 5. Tortoise. I've already shown you some rather unique animals that have gone up into space, showing that sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. But in this case, I'm going to show you an animal that you would definitely not pick as a creature to send into space, a tortoise. But it's true, and it happened in 1968. The Russians, of course, launched the Zond 5 spaceship that year with a capsule carrying samples of soil and seeds, some worms, and 2 steppe tortoises. The ending of their story is not what you think either. You see, they were not only sent into space, they were able to go all the way around the moon and then come back to the planet. The intended landing zone was on land near Russia, but it went off course and landed in the Indian Ocean. Thankfully, the capsule was recovered and the tortoises were fine, but curiously, they had lost 10% of their body weight, no doubt due to the conditions of traveling in space for days on end. Number 4. Frogs. A giant leap for frog kind here. 10 years before man reached the moon, on November 9, 1970, NASA sent a pair of bullfrogs to space in the name of science. The bullfrogs were stored inside a small satellite, and had absolutely no idea the one-way journey they were about to embark on. The bullfrogs orbited the planet for 6 days, along with some small instruments and sensors. Scientists on Earth were observing the effects of zero gravity. The test was focused on the inner ear. Scientists wanted to know how the inner ear balance mechanism would function in a space environment. Because, obviously, if any living creature or human in space got motion sick, that would cause a problem when operating machinery and usually being within sealed suits. The mission was dubbed Orbiting Frog Otolith 1, the otolith being the piece of the inner ear that the scientists were interested in. The frogs were secured inside of special living containers outfitted with heaters and artificial lungs to keep them alive. However, before they were sent into space, scientists disconnected their ability to move by cutting their nerve endings. Electrodes were implanted into the frogs' thoraxes and the vestibular system within the ear to record data on the effects of sustained weightlessness. The results of the test showed that after less than a week, the frogs' equilibrium had returned to normal. So if it worked for them, it, in theory, would work for humans. The experiment was a success. Scientists found that after a couple of days, the frogs' ears normalized. In other words, scientists learned that people's ears could more or less get used to being in a great vacuum of space. As for the frogs, well, sadly, they did not survive. Number 3, spiders. When humanity finally reached the moon in 1969, it was cause for celebration, not the least of which was because the US had won the space race and cemented themselves as the peak space agency. And not surprisingly, since we were able to get someone to the moon, we didn't need to send lots of animals into space for testing, as we had the experience to send up humans safely now. But there were still some animals sent to space post-moon landing, and that included spiders. Why spiders? Well, scientists felt that they would be good test subjects to test the effects of microgravity. In 1973, 2 garden spiders called Anita and Arabella were used in an experiment to see if they could still spin webs in space. This may not sound like a rousing experiment, but it's a curious question, given how gravity affects the bodies of creatures. Sure enough, the spiders were indeed able to make their webs. However, they weren't as thick as they were on Earth. No doubt the gravity's effect on the web. The success of this experiment helps launch more like it, as well as help showcase what microgravity could do to things like motor skills. Number 2, fish. Fish are definitely creatures you wouldn't expect us to send to space, but we did it. NASA recently sent 32 fish into space. The fish went up with 3 astronauts, including Commander Kevin Ford. They journeyed to the International Space Station. But just why in the world would NASA send fish to space? According to Business Insider, it was part of an experiment to see how microgravity would impact marine life. Scientists were interested in seeing what kind of skeletal changes would happen to fish in an environment without gravity. The fish chosen for the mission were Medaka fish, a type of freshwater fish found in Southeast Asia. This fish has transparent skin, and it's easy to see their internal organs, so they made the perfect experimental candidates. They were put into a specialized aquatic habitat. Shortly after, though, they died. They started dropping like flies, though, of course, they couldn't actually drop because there was no gravity to pull them down. The fish died one by one for unknown reasons, though a biologist might suggest that the stress of being taken from a river and then launched into space might have something to do with it. The dead fish were sent back to Earth as specimens to be studied, while researchers preserved the few fish that still lived in the freezer. Chances are, those are dead too. As for what scientists actually learned about fish bones in space, well, nothing has been published. Number 1, nematodes. This particular story comes as a tragedy because in 2003, the Columbia Space Shuttle disintegrated after it attempted to come back down to Earth. When it did, it was carrying a wide array of life forms on board, aka experiments. one of which were nematodes. This is where things get curious, though, because despite the intense heat and the shuttle breaking apart, the nematodes survived and were found in the wreckage. Due to this, they are now one of the go-to animals to be used in space experiments. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about scientists sending animals to space? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!